A decision. That's all it took for Publius Quinctilius Varus to condemn 3 entire legions to disaster. In the heart of the Teutoburg Forest, a blind trust in an ally, Arminius, led to the ambush that forever changed the course of the Roman Empire. How did an experienced commander fall prey to such a fatal mistake? Today, we will dive into the decisions that turned this battle into one of Rome's greatest defeats. Get ready to discover how Varus's lack of caution not only destroyed his forces, but also shook the confidence of an empire that believed it was invincible. Publius Quinctilius Varus, a man of noble origin, had his political and administrative career mapped out from an early age. While he had extensive experience in civilian roles, his time in the Roman provinces shaped him into an effective administrator, but not a born military commander. Varus's success in controlling revolts in Judea and his diplomatic skills made him a respected figure in the Senate. However, this reputation, built in relatively controlled environments, did not prepare him for the unpredictable challenges of the Germanic frontiers. His lack of experience in real combat and in hostile terrains like the Northern Forest would prove to be a decisive factor in the disaster that was to come. When he was appointed governor of Germania, Varus entered a different territory, not just geographically, but also culturally. Germania was not a consolidated Roman province. It was a land of fierce tribes, accustomed to warfare and resistant to Roman influence. Varus, however, believed that his negotiation and diplomacy tactics could subjugate these peoples. He viewed the power of Rome as something that no one would dare to challenge directly. This presumption led him to overlook a crucial aspect: the adaptability and cunning of the Germans, who knew the terrain and its secrets like no one else. Looking at his choices, it's clear that Varus underestimated the complexity of the Germanic landscape. He adopted an overly confident posture, ignoring the advice of local commanders who warned of the dangers of the forests and the latent treachery among the tribes. Varus, however, was convinced that his authority and the power of the Roman legions would be sufficient to maintain order. This overconfidence was fueled by years of relatively easy victories in less hostile regions. However, in the lands beyond the Rhine, he would face a very different reality. Varus's critical mistake was believing that Germania could be pacified merely through displays of strength and diplomatic agreements. His inexperience in leading armies in direct combat made him overlook the need for constant vigilance in unsettled regions. While other, more experienced commanders would have reinforced defenses and thoroughly investigated their Germanic allies, Varus continued with his blind trust policy, failing to realize that this attitude was paving the way for his own ruin. With this illusory confidence in his administrative abilities and the subjugation of the Germanic tribes, Varus did not adequately prepare for the betrayal that awaited him. By disregarding cultural nuances and Germanic resistance, he opened the door to a fatal trap. And it was precisely in this context that a key figure emerged, a man in whom Varus placed all his faith: Arminius, the Germanic leader who would change the fate of Rome. Arminius, born among the Cherusci, one of the many Germanic tribes, was a man whose life was marked by a dangerous duality. He grew up under the shadow of the Roman Empire, having served as an auxiliary officer in the legions, learning their tactics and absorbing their secrets. This deep understanding of the Roman army made him not only a capable leader, but also a strategist with a unique advantage. He understood how Rome thought, how it fought, and, most importantly, where its weaknesses lay. Arminius knew that to defeat Rome, it would take more than brute force. It required undermining their confidence. Varus, on his part, saw in Arminius the perfect ally. He was a man who spoke the language of the Romans and understood their mindset. For Varus, Arminius represented a bridge between the brutality of the Germanic tribes and Roman civility. However, Varus failed to see what was truly at stake. Arminius, who appeared to position himself as a defender of Roman order, actually harbored a deep hatred for the invaders of his homeland. What Varus interpreted as loyalty was, in fact, a carefully maintained disguise by Arminius while he plotted a grand betrayal. Over time, Arminius began to gain Varus's unrestricted trust. He knew the routes the legions would take, the patrol schedules, and most importantly, the most vulnerable points in the Roman formations. His intelligence and strategic skills raised no suspicions in the Roman commander, who saw in Arminius an extension of his own vision of control over Germania. This blind trust was Varus's fatal mistake. He was led to believe that Arminius, shaped by Roman values, would be incapable of betraying the empire that educated him. Little did he know that this very education would be used against Rome. The relationship between Varus and Arminius symbolizes the degree of blindness that imperial power could create. The belief that Roman values were universal blinded Varus to the fact that Arminius never abandoned his Germanic roots. While Varus imagined he was civilizing an ally, Arminius was planning the exact moment of his betrayal, involving various Germanic tribes in a conspiracy that Varus could not even begin to perceive. The pride and belief in Roman invincibility prevented Varus from seeing what was in front of him, a storm of betrayal approaching. Arminius played with the advantage of time and Varus's naivety. The ground was prepared, secret alliances were formed, and the Roman legions were led, under false security, directly into the heart of the Germanic trap. Arminius knew that the element of surprise would be his greatest ally, and that was precisely his deadliest weapon. When the moment came, the strike was so precise and devastating that there was no chance for Varus or his legions to retreat. The march of Publius Quinctilius Varus and his legions through the forests of Germania seemed, at first glance, like a routine operation. There were nearly 20,000 men, accompanied by civilians, merchants, and all the infrastructure of a military campaign, moving relatively calmly through terrain that Varus believed was pacified. However, several warning signs emerged along the way, and all were summarily ignored by the commander. Arminius, with his strategic position alongside Varus, ensured that critical information about the movements of the Germanic tribes never reached the general's ears. Varus, blinded by his trust in Arminius and the belief that he was fully in control of the situation, allowed his troops to disperse during the march. The Roman formations, which would have been ready for battle in other times, moved as if they were in peacetime, oblivious to the danger. This gave the Germans the perfect opportunity to ambush the Romans in terrain where their tactical formations would be ineffective. The dense forest hindered the legions' movement, making them slow and vulnerable. Meanwhile, the Germanic warriors, with intimate knowledge of the local geography, hid in the shadows, waiting for the ideal moment to strike. Some of his advisors and officers even expressed concerns about the vulnerability of the march. The dispersal of the troops, the lack of sufficient scouts, and the advance along an unfamiliar route were all elements that alarmed those familiar with Germanic tactics. However, the voices of these officers were drowned out by Varus's self-confidence and Arminius's cunning, which assured him that everything was under control. Varus's pride, combined with his naive trust in his ally, prevented him from taking the necessary precautions to face a surprise attack. As the march progressed deeper into the forest, the Romans began to encounter increasingly adverse conditions. The weather turned, torrential rain turned the paths into mud, and the dense trees created a natural maze that hindered communication between the troops. Chaos began to set in slowly. The legions, which had previously marched with discipline, started to disorganize. Small warning signs, such as the disappearance of messengers and the silence of the surrounding areas, should have raised a red flag at the Roman command. However, Varus continued to march, believing he was safe with Arminius by his side. This disastrous march would culminate in the worst possible scenario for a Roman commander, a carefully planned ambush. By underestimating the terrain, the weather, and the enemy, Varus led his troops directly into the trap. What should have been a peaceful crossing through the pacified lands of Germania quickly turned into a nightmare from which there would be no return. Blind trust in a traitor and negligence of clear danger signs sealed the fate of Varus's legions. By the time Varus realized the size of the trap he had walked into, it was too late. Arminius had orchestrated the ambush with surgical precision. The Roman legions, advancing disorganized and unprepared, were suddenly surrounded at different points in the forest, unable to form their famous defensive lines. The dense vegetation, mud, and uneven terrain hindered any coordinated response from the Romans. The enemy struck like a shadow, invisible until the last second, launching arrows and spears from hidden positions. The legions, accustomed to open-field combat where they could leverage their numerical and tactical superiority, found themselves completely defenseless in the conditions of the Teutoburg Forest. The Germanic warriors, familiar with the terrain, used guerrilla tactics, attacking quickly and disappearing before the Romans could retaliate. The surprise was total, and panic began to spread among the Roman ranks. The order that Varus so prized in his legion started to unravel, and chaos took over. The pressure exerted by the Germans was relentless. The Romans, cornered and unable to reorganize their troops, tried to form small improvised defenses, but the terrain made any kind of efficient maneuver impossible. The number of casualties was rising rapidly. For the Germans, who knew every shortcut, hill, and obstacle in the forest, the massacre was just a matter of time. Arminius, on his part, had absolute control of the situation. He had calculated every move and knew exactly when and where to strike to maximize terror and confusion among the Romans. Varus, watching his legions disintegrate before his eyes, tried to reverse the situation. However, the conditions of the forest and the unpredictability of the Germanic attacks made any attempt at reorganization fruitless. The desperate troops began to lose all semblance of military discipline. Soldiers strayed from their formations in search of individual protection, only to be shot down or captured. The ambush became a slaughter, with the Romans at a total tactical and psychological disadvantage. Varus's once unshakable confidence turned into absolute despair. As night approached and the screams of pain echoed through the forest, Varus realized he was facing not just a military defeat, but the collapse of an entire operation he believed to be invincible. Arminius, the man he had trusted blindly, had orchestrated one of the most devastating ambushes in Roman military history. And in that moment, as darkness enveloped the Teutoburg Forest, Varus knew that his mistake would not only cost the lives of his legions, but would also shake the very foundations of the Roman Empire.